Today. This is Lucy, believed to be the earliest human ancestor, it says here. The couple thought to have made 3.5 million a year old tracks in Tanzania. Incidentally, those tracks that they talk about there are tracks of what appear to be human footprints. But because they date them 3.5 million years, they tell us it must have been made by Lucy. We don't have any of Lucy's feet in the bones, so we don't really know what her foot looked like. But let me tell you about Lucy. The picture on this side is what Johansen found. That's what he presented to the world. The picture on this side is the reconstruction of Johansen based upon the bones that he found in the picture that's on the left. Now, see the circled bones? That's the knee joint. And when Johansen presented Lucy to the world, he told us that this creature is clearly a transitional kind because this knee joint shows very distinctly that this creature walked upright. And in fact, if Johansen had an ape that had a knee joint like that, he has at least an upright walking ape, possibly a good case for a transition. What Donald Johansen didn't tell us until 8 years later is, in one strata, over here, he found the ape bones. And 3.3 kilometers away, 100 feet deeper in different strata, he found the knee joint. He took that knee joint, put that knee joint with these ape bones and said, "Look at Lucy." If you look at the textbook, and I do this in public schools, and sometimes you get the teachers a little excited. If you look at the color picture in the textbook, you'll see the bones are different color. It's obvious they're from a different creature, but he made the assumption that they were from the same creature and put that together. Now, do fossils prove evolution? No. For these reasons, all life is complicated at all the levels. All the parts are fully formed, and I'll talk about the eye in a second. All the life forms appear suddenly. Let me refer to that also. And then there's no transitions. And the fact that we have fossils speaks about catastrophic processes. The fact that we have billions of dead things that are buried in the ground indicate that, in fact, we have radical processes that cause these things to be buried. Let me deal with a couple things. The human eye. Just look around the room, right? Your eye adjusts to different levels of light. You can see color. You can see depth. It's a very sophisticated organ. How could that come about by accident? And what good is an eye that doesn't work? An eye that doesn't work is useless. We have a lady in our church who's blind. And it's interesting to see how the paradigm in her world is so different than ours. Because she can't see, she has to deal with a whole different world than you and I deal with because we have sight. Well, the human eye coming into existence by accidental processes was a real dilemma, even to Charles Darwin. He wrote about that. He said, I can't understand how it would happen. But he said, but I'm sure that it did. That's a statement of faith, not fact. The other one I wanted to deal with was sudden appearance. In Time magazine about 3 months ago, it was back in April, Time magazine dealt with what's called the Cambrian explosion. And what they said in essence, what they admitted in essence in print, all the scientific communities now admitted it, that evolution from single cells to the explosion of life we find at the bottom of the sea in the rocks that are common called Cambrian was a sudden, abrupt evolution because there's no evidence for it. There's nothing. We find single-celled creatures in some rocks, and then suddenly we find a Cambrian layer that has a complex ecosystem from the bottom of an ocean, all these complicated living creatures with no creatures behind them. The sudden, abrupt appearance of those creatures in the Cambrian. And they admitted that. They said evolutionists now believe that evolution just, happened like that. Well, that doesn't explain anything. That's simply an escape for the fact that there are no transitional forms between creatures. Okay, and fossils themselves demonstrate catastrophic processes. When you find billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth, you'd expect to find fossils, right? That's what fossils are. And if evolutionists were true and they knew that there were billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water, they'd admit that that's how fossils came about, that they were laid down by water. Let me make one other point. I made this morning in the workshop, and I'll tie it together with this. When you look at the mountains of the world, the Andes, the Himalayas, the Rockies, what else? The Alps, let's say in Switzerland. When you look at those mountain ranges, you find mountains made of sedimentary rock. The rock was laid down underwater. And at the peaks of those mountains, in all cases, you find fossils of creatures that lived in the bottom of the sea. Understand, compelling evidence for creation. Let me follow this a little step further. NASA I told you NASA's spending your money on a lot of different things. NASA's spending your money on something else. They're spending money on the Hubble telescope. And to be honest, there's a lot of trouble with the Hubble. The trouble with the Hubble is it's giving them data that contradicts their model. But let me not deal with that. Let me deal just with the Mars question. They've gotten, besides the landers we've sent to Mars and the pictures we've gotten from the Voyagers, we've also gotten some really good pictures of Mars from the Hubble. And as a result of that, they've looked at this planet and said, this is really interesting. This planet has got features on it, canyons in some cases, that are huge, that dwarf the canyons on the continent. And if you've been to Grand Canyon, you know Grand Canyon is a big hole in the ground. That's a big old hole. That's not just a little dinky thing. That's a huge, huge hole in the ground. But the canyons on Mars are much greater. So NASA has said, in all seriousness now, that probably sometime in the past, on the planet of Mars, there was a catastrophic worldwide flood. Now, on a planet that has no water, there's no water on Mars. But if you go to the NASA scientists and say, well, the Earth is 2/3 covered with water, and if I made it smooth, I'd have 9,000 feet. Why don't we have a worldwide flood on the Earth? Oh, no, that can't be true. Why? Because it would jive with what the scriptures have to say. Has nothing to do with evidence. The evidence for the flood on this planet is awesome. Go to Grand Canyon.